Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving deep into one of the most haunting moments in all of Middle-earth's history, a moment that often gets overlooked because we're so focused on Frodo's journey, the War of the Ring. But think about this for a second. What actually happened when Sméagol first saw the ring in Déagol's hand? We all know the story ends with Gollum, this twisted creature living in the dark. But the transformation didn't take centuries. It took seconds. The moment Sméagol's eyes fell on that golden band, something inside him broke. And I've been digging through Tolkien's writings, his letters, the appendices, trying to understand why it happened so fast, so completely. What I found goes way deeper than just, the ring is evil. There are layers here, details that Tolkien embedded in the lore, that make this corruption not just tragic, but inevitable. In ways that'll make you see Gollum differently. So stick with me through this, because we're going to explore 10 aspects of this moment that most people miss. And by the end, you'll understand why Sméagol never stood a chance. Let's start with where this actually happened, because location matters more than you might think in Tolkien's world. The Gladden Fields were in just some random river spot where Déagol decided to go fishing with his cousin. This place had a history, and it was soaked in darkness long before these two Stoors ever showed up. Picture this. It's around the year 2463 of the Third Age. Sméagol and Déagol are out on the River Anduin, doing what Stoors do, which is basically living their best riverfolk life. Déagol gets pulled into the water by a large fish, and they're in the mud at the bottom. His fingers close around something that's been waiting there for nearly 2,500 years. But here's what most people don't put together. This is the exact same area where Isildur died. The same Isildur who cut the ring from Sauron's hand, who refused to destroy it, who was riding north with his few remaining men when they got ambushed by orcs. Right here in these fields, Tolkien tells us in the appendices that Isildur put on the ring to escape, turned invisible, and tried to swim across the Anduin. But the ring betrayed him, slipped off his finger in the water, and the orcs shot him full of arrows. His body was never recovered. So we're talking about a place where one of the most catastrophic betrayals by the ring actually occurred. Where a king died in terror and desperation, where orc arrows darkened the water, where the ring itself made a conscious choice to abandon its bearer. This wasn't just geography. Gladden Fields had absorbed violence, death, and the ring's malice for millennia. When Tolkien describes places in Middle-earth, they're not neutral. Mirkwood becomes dark because of the dead marshes are haunted by the spirits of those who fell there. Places remember. So when Déagol's hand touched that ring in the riverbed, he wasn't just finding lost jewelry, he was disturbing something that had been festering in that spot. Something that had turned the very mud and water into a kind of spiritual wound in the world. Tolkien writes in his letters about how evil in Middle-earth doesn't just disappear, it lingers. It corrupts the physical world itself. The Gladden Fields were already cursed ground before Sméagol ever showed up. And here's the thing that really gets me. The ring chooses when to be found. It's not passive. Tolkien makes this clear over and over. The ring wanted to leave the river bottom. It had been dormant, waiting, and something about this moment, these two hobbits, made it reveal itself. But it revealed itself in a place that was already predisposed to darkness, where the barriers between ordinary life and corruption were already thin. Think about what that means for Sméagol. He's standing on the bank. It's his birthday. He's probably in a good mood. Suddenly his friend comes up from the water holding this beautiful golden ring. Sméagol's first breath after seeing it is air that is thick with old death and ancient malice. The environment itself was working against him. This wasn't the Shire, with its gardens and its beer and its basic decency built into every hobbit hole. This was the Gladden Fields, where the land itself remembered Isildur's screams, where the water still carried the echo of the ring's first great betrayal of the Third Age. Sméagol was spiritually outmatched before he even knew there was a fight happening. The corruption didn't start when he strangled Déagol. It started when he breathed in the atmosphere of that cursed place and let his eyes focus on the ring. Gleaming in his friend's palm. Now let's talk about timing, because Tolkien doesn't do coincidences. The fact that Déagol found the ring specifically on Sméagol's birthday is just a narrative detail to make the story more ironic. It's actually central to understanding how the ring works and why Sméagol fell so completely so fast. In Tolkien's world, birthdays have power. Think about Bilbo's 11th first birthday, how the ring pushed him to make a spectacle, to draw attention, to create drama. Or think about how Frodo inherited the ring on his own birthday, September 22nd, the same day as Bilbo's. These aren't random dates. Tolkien was deeply influenced by Norse mythology and medieval literature, where significant events cluster around dates of personal importance, where the cosmic and the personal intersect. So Sméagol's birthday means he's already in a heightened emotional state. He's probably expecting some kind of recognition, maybe even gifts, because that's what birthdays are about in Hobbit culture. Bilbo gives gifts on his birthday, sure, but the expectation of being celebrated, of being special for a day, that's baked into how hobbits think about birthdays. And here comes Déagol, his friend, his cousin, pulling something precious and beautiful out of the river. And Sméagol's immediate thought isn't, oh, how wonderful for Déagol. His immediate thought, according to Tolkien's account in The Lord of the Rings, is that it should be his. He calls it his birthday present. He demands it. Work. The ring didn't have to work hard to corrupt Sméagol, because Sméagol's mind was already primed with entitlement, with the feeling that today, of all days, he deserves something special. But here's where it gets really insidious. The ring is intelligent. Sauron poured so much of his own power and will into it that the ring itself can perceive, can calculate, can choose its moments. It had been in that river for thousands of years. It could have revealed itself to any number of people who fished those waters or swam in them, but it chose this day, this moment, when one of the two people present was already psychologically vulnerable, already feeling like the world owed him something. Tolkien writes in his letters about how the ring enhances what's already there, how it takes the natural desires and weaknesses of its bearer and magnifies them. Sméagol's sense of birthday entitlement became, under the ring's influence, an overwhelming conviction that Déagol had stolen what was rightfully his. The ring found the crack in Sméagol's character and drove straight into it. And think about what this means for how quickly he fell. Most ring-bearers have some time between first seeing the ring and possessing it, time for their normal psychology to be in place, time to build up mental defenses, however inadequate. But Sméagol saw it on a day when his ego was already inflated, when he already felt special and deserving, and the ring whispered, "Yes, you are special. You do deserve this. Take it. It's yours." The timing wasn't coincidence. It was a carefully sprung trap, and Sméagol walked into it with his hands out, already reaching for what he thought should be his birthday present. The corruption was instantaneous because the groundwork was already laid. His birthday wasn't just bad luck. It was the worst possible psychological moment for him to encounter the most corrupting object in Middle-earth. Now we need to talk about what kind of hobbits these actually were, because when most people think hobbit, they think Frodo, Sam, Merry, Pippin, basically the Shire hobbits we follow through the quest. But Sméagol and Déagol weren't Shire hobbits, they were Stoors, and that matters enormously. Tolkien lays this out in the Lord of the Rings and in various appendices. There were three branches of hobbits originally: Harfoots, Falahides, and Stoors. The Harfoots were the most common. The Falahides were the adventurous ones, who liked trees and had some elf friendship in their background. And then there were the Stoors. The Stoors were the largest and heaviest build of hobbits. They loved rivers and boats and fishing. Here's the key detail that Tolkien emphasizes. They were the most willing to have dealings with men. Some of them were even willing to live in proximity to big folk. What does that tell us? It tells us that Stoors didn't have the same insular innocence that Shire hobbits had cultivated over generations. The Shire was deliberately isolated, deliberately kept separate from the troubles of the wider world, protected by rangers that the hobbits didn't even know about. That isolation created a kind of spiritual purity, or at least a spiritual naivete, that gave hobbits like Frodo and Bilbo some resistance to the ring. They had been raised in an environment where the worst problem was maybe someone stealing your vegetables, or gossip about who was courting whom. They had no framework for understanding real evil because they'd been sheltered from it. But the Stoors never had that shelter. They lived along the Anduin. They traded with men. They knew about the wider world with all its dangers and complexities and moral compromises. This meant that Sméagol's mind was fundamentally different from Frodo's mind, even though they were both hobbits. Sméagol knew about power, about getting what you want, about the ways people manipulate and scheme. The Stoors, who lived near the Gladden Fields, weren't part of some innocent pastoral community. Tolkien mentions that Sméagol's family was influential, that his grandmother ruled the family with considerable authority. There was hierarchy, there was politics, there was jockeying for position. Sméagol grew up understanding that some people had more than others, that some people deserved respect and deference, that there were winners and losers in social arrangements. When the ring offered him power, offered him the ability to be special and above others, it wasn't offering something completely alien to his worldview. It was offering an intensified version of what he already understood about how the world worked. Compare that to Frodo, who literally had to have the concept of the ring's danger explained to him by Gandalf, who was shocked and horrified by the idea that this little golden ring could be the instrument of ultimate evil. Frodo's innocence gave him strength, because the ring had to work harder to corrupt someone who had no natural inclination toward domination or power. But Sméagol, the ring spoke his language from the first moment. His Stoor background meant he was already halfway down the road the ring wanted to take him. He didn't need to be taught about power and secrecy and possessiveness. He already knew. The ring just had to turn up the volume on instincts he already had. His corruption wasn't about transforming an innocent into a monster. It was about revealing the monster that the Stoor way of life, with its compromises and its proximity to the darker aspects of the world, had already started to create. And here's something that really haunts me when I think about it. Tolkien writes that the Stoors were the last of the hobbit kinds to cross the Misty Mountains into Eriador. Many of them never crossed at all. They stayed east of the mountains, in the valley of the Anduin, and eventually most of them either died out or were absorbed into the race of men. Sméagol's people were basically a dying branch of hobbit kind, already being erased from history, already losing whatever made them distinctly hobbit in the first place. There's something deeply tragic about that. The Stoor resistance to corruption, whatever natural hobbit resistance to evil might have existed in their ancestors, had already been worn down by generations of compromise, of living too close to darkness, of giving up their distinctiveness. Sméagol wasn't corrupted despite being a hobbit. He was corrupted because he was the wrong kind of hobbit, from a people who'd already lost their way long before the ring entered the picture. Let us get into what actually happened in those crucial seconds between Déagol surfacing with the ring and Sméagol strangling him, because there's a detail here that changes everything about how we understand Sméagol's corruption. In the account Gandalf gives Frodo, which comes from the stories that survived among Sméagol's people, Sméagol never actually touched the ring first. Read that again. He never touched it first. Déagol found it, Déagol held it, and Sméagol wanted it so badly that he killed Déagol while Déagol was still the ring-bearer. This is completely different from every other instance of ring-bearing we know about. Bilbo found it lying in the tunnel and picked it up. No murder required. Frodo inherited it from Bilbo in a peaceful transfer. Isildur cut it from Sauron's hand in the heat of battle, which is violent but at least has the context of war. Even Gollum's later possession of it started with that initial finding by Déagol, but Sméagol's possession started with murder. Think about what that means spiritually, magically, in terms of how the ring bonds with its bearer. The ring is Sauron's creation. It's filled with his power. And Sauron is a being of domination, cruelty, and destruction. When Sméagol's first act as ring-bearer was choking the life out of his friend, his cousin, someone he'd known probably his whole life, he was performing a kind of dark ritual without even knowing it. He was baptizing himself in murder. He was proving to the ring, if the ring needed proof, that he was worthy of it, that he could embrace the darkness it represented. Every other ring-bearer came to murder and betrayal later, if they came to it at all. Bilbo had the ring for 60 years before he even considered using it for anything truly harmful, and even then he resisted. But Sméagol's very first moment of possession was murder. Tolkien understood ritual and symbolism. He was a Catholic. He studied medieval literature, where the first act of a relationship determines its nature, where how you begin something shapes everything that follows. Sméagol began his relationship with the ring by demonstrating that he would kill for it before he even knew what it was, before he understood its power purely because he wanted it. The ring had to do almost nothing to corrupt him, because he corrupted himself. His desire was so immediate and so overwhelming that he committed the ultimate betrayal without hesitation. And here's the thing that makes it even worse. Tolkien tells us through Gandalf that Sméagol strangled Déagol. Not stabbed him, not hit him with a rock, strangled him. It's personal. That takes time. You have to keep your hands on someone's throat. You have to feel them struggling. You have to watch their face. You have to maintain your intent to kill for however many seconds or minutes it takes for them to stop breathing. Déagol had time to understand that his friend, his cousin, the person he'd gone fishing with that morning, was killing him. Sméagol had time to stop, time to come to his senses, time to realize what he was doing. But he didn't stop. He strangled Déagol to death and took the ring from his dead fingers. When Frodo later asks Gollum about this, Gollum's response is chilling in its casualness. He says Déagol wouldn't give him the ring, that it was his birthday present, that he deserved it. Even hundreds of years later, even after everything the ring did to him, Sméagol never showed real remorse for that murder. He rationalized it immediately, and he never stopped rationalizing it. The murder became the foundation of his entire relationship with the ring. Every time he looked at it, every time he touched it, he was touching something he'd killed for, and that made it more precious, not less. This is why Sméagol had no chance of resisting the ring's further corruption. He'd already crossed a line that most people never cross, that most ring-bearers never crossed, even after years of possession. He'd proven what he was willing to do for the ring before he even understood what the ring was. And the ring knew it had found someone who would prioritize it over friendship, over family, over his own soul, instantly and without reservation. Sméagol didn't gradually fall into evil. He jumped into it head first, and the ring welcomed him with open arms, so to speak. His first act as ring-bearer was the worst act, and everything after that was just living out the implications of that first terrible choice. He murdered his way into the ring's possession, and that murder marked him forever. Now I want to talk about something. Tolkien reveals in his letters and in the deeper lore something about Sméagol's character before he ever saw the ring, because there's this tendency to think of the deeper ring as purely corrupting, as turning good people bad. But that's not quite how Tolkien described it working. The ring enhances what's already there. It finds the weakness, the crack in the foundation, and it pries that crack open until the whole structure collapses. So what was Sméagol like before? Tolkien gives us hints, and they're not pretty. Gandalf tells Frodo that Sméagol was already of a sort of inquisitive and curious disposition, but in a way that was self-serving. He used his curiosity not to learn and grow, but to find things out that he could use to his advantage. He was a snoop, basically, someone who pried into other people's business, who listened at doors, who hoarded information he could use for manipulation. The word Tolkien uses through Gandalf is sharp. Sméagol had sharp eyes and ears. But sharp in this context isn't a compliment. It means he was always looking for an angle, always watching for weakness, always listening for secrets. This is before the ring. This is who Sméagol was when he woke up on his birthday morning and decided to go fishing with Déagol. He was already someone who valued secrets and hidden knowledge, someone who understood that information was power, someone who was more interested in what he could get from people than in genuine relationship with them. It found them, recognized them, and thought, yes, this one is ready-made for me. All I have to do is offer him the ultimate secret, the ultimate power, and he'll do the rest himself. There's a passage in the account of Sméagol's early time with the ring where Tolkien describes how Sméagol used it to discover secrets and use the knowledge for malice and mischief. He'd already been doing that before, just without the advantage of invisibility. The ring just made him better at what he already enjoyed doing. He would spy on people, learn things about them, and then use that knowledge to hurt them or manipulate them. This wasn't the ring teaching him to be cruel. This was the ring enabling cruelty that was already part of his character. And here's what really gets me. Sméagol enjoyed it. Tolkien makes it clear that Sméagol took pleasure in using his knowledge to cause harm, in knowing things others didn't know, in having power over people through his secrets. When the ring showed itself to Sméagol in Déagol's hand, it wasn't corrupting and innocent. It was calling to someone who already understood power through secrets, who already valued hidden knowledge above friendship, who already had a streak of malice in his character. The ring recognized a kindred spirit. Sméagol's immediate reaction, that instant desire to possess what Déagol had found, came from a place that was already dark. Most people, if their friend found something valuable, would feel happy for them, or maybe a little envious, but still basically decent about it. Sméagol felt entitled to it, felt that Déagol was stealing from him by not immediately handing it over, felt that violence was an acceptable response to not getting what he wanted. That's not normal psychology. Even for someone influenced by an evil artifact, that's someone who was already broken in fundamental ways. Tolkien believed in the reality of evil as a choice, not just as an external force. Sméagol chose, in that moment, to value a golden ring more than his cousin's life. The ring didn't make that choice for him. It presented the option. It made the option attractive. But Sméagol's hand on Déagol's throat was Sméagol's choice. And the fact that he made that choice so quickly, so easily, tells us everything we need to know about what was already inside him. The ring found someone who was already walking toward darkness, someone who already had the capacity for murder buried not very deep under the surface. And it just removed the last few inhibitions that were holding him back. Sméagol was corrupted quickly, because there wasn't much uncorrupted material to work with in the first place. The ring recognized its own, here's where we need to talk about something that Tolkien emphasizes in his discussion of the ring's power. It wasn't dormant when Sméagol found it. This is crucial. When Bilbo found the ring in the Misty Mountains about 2,500 years later, the ring had gone quiet. Sauron was still just the necromancer hiding in Mirkwood. It's not yet revealed, not yet actively searching for the ring. The ring was in a kind of sleep mode. It's dangerous, but not actively, aggressively corrupting. That's why Bilbo lasted 60 years with relatively minor corruption. Why he was able to give it up eventually with Gandalf's help. But when Sméagol found it in the Gladden Fields, it had only been lost for about 2,500 years, and in the timeline of immortal beings and ancient artifacts, that's nothing. The ring still remembered Isildur. It still remembered being worn by the hand of Sauron himself. Think about what that means in terms of the ring's power and awareness. When Isildur died, Sauron was still a major force in the world. The ring had been with Isildur for only 2 years, and before that, it had been on Sauron's hand for thousands of years. The ring's primary programming, so to speak, was still fresh. It wanted to get back to Sauron, was actively searching, actively trying to manipulate events to bring about its return. When it revealed itself to Déagol, and more importantly to Sméagol, it wasn't just lying there passively waiting to corrupt someone. It was hunting. It was an active, malevolent intelligence, looking for a bearer who could eventually get it closer to its master. Tolkien writes in The Lord of the Rings that the ring had a will of its own, that it could shrink or expand to slip off a finger at crucial moments, that it could choose when to be found and by whom. The ring that Sméagol encountered was operating at close to full capacity in terms of its independent will and power. It sized up Sméagol and Déagol in an instant, recognized that Sméagol was the one with the darkness, with the potential for obsession, with the willingness to do whatever it took to possess something precious, and it went to work on him immediately. The corruption was so fast because the ring was so active, so intentional in its corruption. It wasn't waiting around to see if Sméagol might be useful. It was actively bending Sméagol's will toward murder and possession from the first moment his eyes focused on it. Later, ring-bearers had the advantage, if you can call it that, of encountering the ring when it was less active, less connected to Sauron's immediate will. But Sméagol got hit with the full force of a ring that was still warm from Sauron's hand. Metaphorically speaking, that still carried the direct imprint of the Dark Lord's purpose and power. It's like the difference between encountering a predator that's sleeping versus one that's hunting. Bilbo found a sleeping predator. Sméagol encountered one that was actively stalking prey. The ring wanted a bearer who would keep it, who would obsess over it, would eventually bring it within reach of beings or forces that could get it back to Mordor. Sméagol's immediate and complete corruption was partly because the ring was putting maximum effort into corrupting him. And there is another aspect to this that Tolkien hints at in his descriptions of how the ring works. The more recently it had been with Sauron, the more of Sauron's actual personality and will it carried. It wasn't just an object of power. It was an extension of Sauron himself. When Sméagol looked at the ring, Sauron's will looked back at him, assessed him, and recognized him as useful. Not useful for returning to Mordor directly. Sméagol wasn't going anywhere near there, but useful as a hiding place. As a vessel that would keep the ring safe, and obsessed over and absolutely unwilling to let it go. The speed of Sméagol's corruption was the speed of Sauron's own will, crashing into a mind that had no defenses against it. The ring was awake, hungry, and intentional, and Sméagol never stood a chance against that level of focused malevolence. Let's talk about what happened after the murder, because this is where Sméagol's isolation begins, and where his transformation into Gollum really accelerates. Tolkien tells us through Gandalf's narrative that Sméagol's grandmother, who was the head of their family, drove him out. Now, Tolkien doesn't give us the exact details of what she knew or suspected, but think about the implications here. Déagol disappeared. Sméagol suddenly had this golden ring and became weird and secretive. Hobbits aren't stupid, even Stoor hobbits living along the Anduin. His grandmother, who Tolkien specifically says ruled the family, would have asked questions. Where's Déagol? What happened on your fishing trip? What's that you keep touching in your pocket? And Sméagol, who Tolkien tells us was already a snoop and a liar, probably told some story. But she didn't believe him, or she saw something in his eyes, or maybe other people saw him do it. However it happened, she threw him out. This is significant because in Hobbit culture, or really in any of the cultures of Middle-earth, exile from your family is serious. It means you've done something unforgivable. It means the people who should love you and protect you have decided you're too dangerous or too corrupted to keep around. Sméagol's grandmother cut him off from the community, from family bonds, from everything that might have pulled him back from the edge. And this is exactly what the ring wanted. Tolkien is clear about this pattern. The ring isolates its bearers. It makes them paranoid, secretive, unwilling to share it, or even be around others who might see it and want it. But with Sméagol, the ring got a huge assist from his own family. They did the work of isolation for it. Once Sméagol was exiled, he had nothing to live for except the ring. No community to care about, no family to perform normalcy for, no social obligations to maintain any kind of civilized behavior. He could just retreat into obsession, and that's exactly what he did. Tolkien describes how Sméagol went underground, literally making his way eventually to the Misty Mountains, and finding those lightless caves under the roots of the mountains where Bilbo would later encounter him. But it wasn't an overnight journey. Sméagol wandered for years, maybe decades, using the ring to hide, to steal, to survive, and slowly becoming less and less like a hobbit and more like the